Midnight in California. Fog rolls low across a quiet street in San Jose, swallowing the outlines of a house that should not exist. Out of the mist rises a crooked silhouette, towers leaning at odd angles, roofs stacked where roofs shouldn't be, windows staring blindly into other windows. A mansion that looks assembled by instinct instead of reason. Wood and glass tangled into a puzzle with no solution. This is the Winchester house. From the outside, it almost feels inviting. A strange kind of beauty clings to it, a fairy tale palace frozen in time. Wraparound porches, bright stained glass catching the moonlight, ornate details that suggest wealth, care, and imagination. But the illusion dies the moment you step inside. Every hallway feels wrong. Every turn disorients. Every step carries the uneasy sense that you are being watched. Stairs climb confidently and stop at the ceiling. Doors open not into rooms, but into walls. Windows are placed where no window should ever be, facing other windows just inches away. Nothing flows, nothing resolves. The house behaves like a maze designed to unsettle the mind. This is not architectural failure. It is deliberate. Every nail in this mansion was driven by a woman who believed that if construction ever stopped, she would die. Her name was Sarah Winchester. She was the widow of William Wirt Winchester, heir to the company that manufactured the rifle that won the West, a weapon that helped shape a nation and killed tens of thousands in the process. When her husband died, Sarah inherited a fortune so vast it bordered on unimaginable. But along with the money came something else: guilt, fear, and a warning. Spiritualists told her the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles were hunting her, that they were restless, angry, and that they blamed her. According to the story, there was only one way to survive. She must build a house so confusing that the ghosts would lose their way. A structure that never stopped changing. A sanctuary made of motion. They believed she thought the ghosts of the Winchester dead were hunting her, and that endless construction was the only way to confuse them, to keep them wandering. Some workers said she had lost her mind. Others believed she was far more calculating than she appeared. A few suspected she was both. What is certain is this: Sarah Winchester inherited a fortune worth roughly $500 million in today's money and used it to create one of the strangest structures ever built in America. The work never stopped. Day crews hammered under the California sun, night crews worked by lamplight, their tools echoing through the orchards. Neighbors said the sound never ceased. Some claimed it resembled a heartbeat. Sarah herself reportedly slept only a few hours a night. Servants said she wandered the halls in darkness, checking rooms, testing doors, listening. For what? No one knew. By the time she died, the house had become a labyrinth. 160 rooms, 40 staircases, 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors. Some led to ordinary spaces, others led nowhere at all. A closet only 3 inches deep, a chimney that never reached the roof, a door on the second floor opening directly onto a 15-foot drop. Visitors said the house felt wrong, as if it was never meant to be understood, only endured. Not haunted in the way ghost stories usually sound, no rattling chains, no screaming apparitions, just wrong, like walking through a fever dream. Hallways doubled back on themselves. Rooms felt as if they shifted when you weren't looking. Corners seemed to appear twice. Distances stretched, then collapsed. The house did not frighten visitors. It unsettled them, as if the rules of space had quietly failed. And still, Sarah Winchester kept building. She kept the workers employed. She kept the house expanding, and she never explained why. To understand the reason, you have to go back across the country, back across the years, back to New Haven, Connecticut, back to a young woman who married into one of the wealthiest and most controversial families in America, back to the rifle that made it all possible, back to the beginning. At first glance, the Winchester rifle did not look extraordinary. A simple lever-action firearm, wooden stock, metal barrel, but inside was a mechanism that changed warfare, hunting, and American expansion forever. It allowed the shooter to reload faster than any gun before it. Speed was everything. Before Winchester, a soldier or settler had to stop, measure powder, seat the ball, reload one shot at a time. The Winchester eliminated that pause. Some models could fire 15 rounds in rapid succession, no lowering the weapon, no break in momentum. That speed changed the balance of power. You could clear a room, hold off an attack, hunt without interruption. The marketing was ruthless and brilliant. The gun that won the West. Posters showed rugged cowboys and frontiersmen, Winchester in hand, framed as symbols of freedom and progress. The rifle became an icon of manifest destiny, of expansion, of American ambition. It also became a symbol of death. Native American tribes faced Winchester repeaters in the hands of U.S. cavalry. Bison herds, once numbering over 60 million, were reduced to near extinction, many killed by commercial hunters using Winchester rifles. The Civil War, range wars, outlaws and lawmen alike, everywhere the rifle went, people died. And the money flowed. The Winchester Repeating Company made a fortune. By the 1860s, its founder, Oliver Winchester, was among the richest men in America. His son, William Wirt Winchester, inherited the business. In 1862, William married Sarah Lockwood Pardee. Sarah was 23 years old, small, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair and serious eyes. She came from a respected Connecticut family. She was educated, fluent in several languages, and an accomplished pianist. Friends described her as thoughtful, reserved, deeply religious. She married into wealth beyond imagination. The Winchester mansion in New Haven was grand but tasteful. Dinner parties, charity events, the carefully curated life of new money trying to prove it belonged among old money. Sarah played her role, the quiet wife, the dignified daughter-in-law. But there was a weight beneath it all. The rifle was never far from conversation. Every chandelier, every silk dress, every servant's wage traced back to the same source, a weapon designed to kill efficiently. Sarah never spoke publicly about her feelings, but those close to her said she was uneasy, that she asked questions, that she struggled with the contradiction of living comfortably on violence. Then the funerals began. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester. A healthy baby, bright-eyed, small like her mother. Sarah poured everything into her, all her love, all her hope for a future untouched by the past. Annie lived 6 weeks. She died of marasmus, a wasting disease doctors could not treat. Sarah held her child as she faded. The grief was absolute. Sarah withdrew completely. She stopped attending social events, stopped playing piano. Friends said she barely spoke for months. William tried to comfort her, but the loss settled between them like a shadow. They never had another child. 15 years later, in 1881, William fell ill with tuberculosis. He weakened slowly, coughed blood, lost weight, faded away in the same grand house that once hosted laughter and music. Sarah nursed him until the end. She was 43 years old, a widow, childless, and the sole heir to a fortune built on an estimated 50,000 deaths. Sarah could not sleep.
Night after night, she lay awake in the New Haven mansion, rooms too large, too silent, too empty, listening to a house that no longer felt like shelter at all. And it was there, in that silence, that the message would come. The silence pressed down on her. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps moving just out of sight. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like someone testing the glass, trying to get in. At night, the house no longer felt like shelter, it felt like exposure. Her friends worried. Her remaining family tried to help. They offered company, advice, prayer, but grief of that depth does not respond to polite concern or well-meaning reassurance. Sarah Winchester was drowning, and she was searching for anything at all, that could explain why God had taken everything from her. That is where spiritualism entered her life. In the 1880s, America was obsessed with the dead. Séances filled middle-class parlors from Boston to San Francisco. Mediums claimed they could speak across the veil, summon voices, deliver messages from the other side. It was part comfort, part spectacle, desperate hope dressed in ritual and candlelight. For people like Sarah, educated, deeply religious, and shattered by loss, spiritualism offered something the church could not just faith, but contact, not just acceptance, but answers, the possibility, however fragile, of hearing her daughter's voice one more time. The exact details are unclear. Some accounts say Sarah brought Sarah to a medium in Boston. Others place the meeting in New Haven. A few insist Sarah sought the medium out herself, traveling quietly, unwilling to let her family see how far her grief had carried her. What most versions agree on is this: the medium told Sarah she was cursed. Not by God, not by fate, but the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, Native Americans, soldiers, settlers, hunters, all restless, all angry, all drawn to the family that had profited from their deaths.
According to the story, the medium told Sarah the spirits had already taken her husband and her child, and they would take her too, unless she acted. She had to leave New Haven. She had to go west as far as she could. She had to buy a house, and she had to build. Constantly, without pause, without completion. As long as the house remained unfinished, the spirits would be confused, forced to wander, distracted, unable to find her. But the moment construction stopped, the medium warned, Sarah would die. Most people would have dismissed this as nonsense, the manipulations of a charlatan preying on a grieving widow, but Sarah did not dismiss it. Whether she believed every word, or whether she simply clung to a structure that gave her grief direction, the result was the same. She made a decision. In 1884, Sarah Winchester sold the New Haven mansion. She packed her belongings, closed the doors on the life she had known, and boarded a train heading west. She told few people where she was going. To most of her family, she simply disappeared. She crossed the country by rail, past farmland and prairie, over mountains and desert, until she reached California, the edge of the map, the place where America ran out of land and met the sea. In San Jose, surrounded by orchards and fog, she found an unfinished farmhouse, 8 rooms, 2 stories, plain, unremarkable, a wooden structure sitting on 40 acres of fruit trees. She bought it. Then she hired carpenters. Construction began in 1886, and for the next 38 years, it never stopped. The hammering began at dawn. Carpenters arrived each morning at the San Jose property to find instructions waiting. Sometimes there were sketches on brown paper, sometimes only verbal orders delivered through the head foreman, and sometimes there were no instructions at all, just commands to tear down what had been built the day before and start again. They worked until sunset. Then the night crew arrived. This was not how normal construction worked. Most projects ended at dusk. Materials were expensive, labor was costly. Working by lamplight and candlelight was inefficient and dangerous. But Sarah Winchester did not care about efficiency. She cared about continuity. The house had to keep growing, day and night, every single day. Workers described a strange rhythm to the job. Some days they framed an entire bedroom, complete with windows and a door. By morning, Sarah would decide the room belonged somewhere else. The crew would dismantle it board by board and rebuild it 20 feet away. On other days, they constructed staircases that climbed 7 steps, turned at a landing, and ended abruptly at a ceiling. The men would ask the foreman if there had been a mistake. He would shake his head. Those were the orders. Doors were installed that opened onto blank walls. Cabinets were built barely an inch deep. Nothing was corrected. Nothing was explained. The house did not sleep, and neither, it seemed, did the woman inside it. Decorative, useless, like props on a stage built for no audience. A chimney rose 4 stories and stopped just short of the roof, venting smoke into the attic instead of the open air. Windows were placed at floor level, staring into other rooms instead of the outside world. Nothing followed logic, nothing followed function. And yet, the paychecks always cleared. In an era when work was unreliable and wages were often delayed or never paid at all, that mattered more than understanding. Sarah Winchester paid in cash every week on time. She also fed the workers, hot meals prepared by her kitchen staff and carried out to the scaffolding and work sites. In the 1890s, during economic depressions that left families hungry and desperate, this job was more than employment. It was a lifeline. So the men stayed, and they kept building. Sarah herself remained mostly unseen.
She moved through the house at odd hours, inspecting progress, leaving notes, changing plans. Servants said she rarely slept more than a few hours at a time, that much of her life was spent walking the halls alone, listening to the shifting bones of the structure as it grew and reshaped itself around her. One worker later claimed he glimpsed her through a window late at night, a small figure dressed in black, standing in an unfinished room, staring at the walls as if reading something written there, something only she could see. The house expanded relentlessly. 8 rooms became 20, 20 became 40, wings stretched outward in conflicting directions, towers rose. A grand ballroom was constructed, then sealed off and never used. A conservatory appeared, filled with stained glass windows imported from Europe. Modern appliances were installed in the kitchen, cutting edge for the time. But the oddities multiplied faster than the ordinary spaces. A door on the 2nd floor opened directly into empty air above the garden. No railing, no balcony, just a 15-foot drop onto brick pavement. A narrow staircase with steps barely 2 inches high climbed slowly, 44 steps to rise just over 9 feet. Hallways looped back on themselves, switchbacks and dead ends seemingly designed to disorient anyone who tried to move through the house with purpose. It began to attract attention. Local newspapers coined a name for it, the Winchester Mystery House, a mansion where a wealthy widow kept crews working day and night on a building project that made no sense to anyone outside the gates. Reporters tried to interview Sarah. She refused. Guards were hired. Trespassers were turned away. The gates stayed locked. Orchards surrounded the property, forming a quiet green barrier between the road and the ever-growing maze of turrets and gables. But rumors slipped through anyway, and they were about to grow darker.
Deep inside the labyrinth was a room Sarah visited every night. The servants called it the séance room. It was small, unremarkable at first glance, buried in the center of the house, with no exterior walls, no windows, no natural light. You had to know the route to find it,
through a specific hallway, past a door disguised as a cabinet, down a narrow passage barely wide enough for one person. Once inside, the room felt wrong. Along one wall were 13 iron hooks, evenly spaced, empty. No coats ever hung there, no tools, no explanation, just 13 hooks holding nothing at all. There was one way in, but 3 ways out. One door led back the way you came, another opened into a completely different hallway. The third was a false exit. If opened without caution, it would send you tumbling into a storage room 8 feet below. At the center of the room sat a cabinet. According to servants, Sarah kept robes and ritual objects inside it. What those objects were, no one ever said, or no one ever knew. A bell system connected the séance room to Sarah's bedroom. 2 bells. One rang at midnight, or, in some accounts, at 2 in the morning, the hour Sarah believed the veil between worlds was thinnest. That bell either summoned the spirits or summoned Sarah to meet them. Stories differ. The second bell rang again later, precisely 13 chimes, one for each hook on the wall, to signal that the session was over, to send whatever had been summoned away. Workers who stayed late claimed they heard the bells, that they heard footsteps afterward echoing through hallways that should have been empty. Some said they heard Sarah's voice, soft, distant, muffled, as if she were speaking to someone in a language they could almost understand. But no one ever saw what happened inside that room. Sarah never explained it. She never confirmed or denied the séances. The only fragments come from servants who worked in the house for years, and even they spoke carefully, offering impressions rather than facts.
One housekeeper said Sarah spent hours alone in the séance room, sometimes sitting in complete darkness. Other nights, she lit candles that burned strange colors. Another servant claimed Sarah received instructions during these sessions, architectural directions, warnings about which rooms to avoid, guidance for the next phase of construction. Whether Sarah truly believed she was communicating with the dead, or whether the séance room was simply a place where she could retreat and grieve in private, we cannot say. What we do know is this: the room existed. It still exists. Visitors can walk through it today, though the hooks are gone and the bell system has long since been disconnected. And we know that after long nights in that hidden room, the house would change. Rooms completed one week were sealed shut the next. Hallways vanished. New staircases appeared. Whatever decisions were being made in the darkness, they reshaped the house by morning. And the building never stopped. Entire wings, projects that had taken months of labor, were suddenly closed. Doors were nailed shut. Furniture was removed. Spaces erased as if something had happened there that Sarah Winchester wanted forgotten or contained. The workers learned quickly not to ask questions. They learned to follow the new instructions, even when those instructions contradicted everything they had been told the day before, because the alternative was losing the job, and no one wanted to lose this job. The house was growing faster now. 40 rooms became 60, 60 became 80. The structure sprawled across the property like a living organism, swallowing orchards, casting long shadows that stretched farther each year. Towers rose where trees once stood. Hallways threaded through older hallways. The mansion no longer felt built, it felt grown. And at the center of it all, every night at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, a bell rang in the darkness. If you had walked into the Winchester house in the year 1900, you would not have made it 10 feet before becoming lost. The front door, when Sarah chose to use a front door at all, opened into a hallway that immediately split into 3 identical paths, same wallpaper, same dim lighting, same creaking wooden floors beneath your feet. Choose the wrong direction, and you would begin to circle. Some hallways were built as loops,
designed so subtly that anyone walking them would swear they were moving deeper into the house, only to arrive back where they started, disoriented and uncertain. Other corridors ended abruptly. You would turn a corner expecting another passage, and instead face a blank wall. No door, no window, just wallpaper and silence. The staircases were worse. One staircase climbed 44 steps to gain only 9 feet in height, each step just 2 inches tall, so shallow you barely lifted your foot. Sarah reportedly designed it that way because of her arthritis. The gentle incline eased the strain on her joints. But to visitors unfamiliar with the house, it felt unreal, like climbing forever without reaching anything. Another staircase rose 7 steps, turned at a landing, and ended directly at the ceiling. No attic access, no hidden door, just wood meeting plaster. The workers had built it. Then they stopped. They waited for instructions. None ever came. The staircase remained. Doors were everywhere. More than 2,000 according to later inventories. Some opened into ordinary rooms. Others opened into walls. A few opened into other doors. You would turn the handle, push forward, and find yourself staring at the back of another door just inches away, sealed shut. One door on the second floor opened onto nothing at all, a straight drop into the garden below, 15 feet down onto brick pavement. No railing, no warning, just a threshold and empty air. Why build a door like that? Some said it was a trap for the spirits, that they would chase Sarah through the house, burst through the door, and fall. Others believed it was simply a mistake, a doorway meant to lead to a balcony that was never constructed.
But Sarah never had it removed. Like everything else that made no sense, it stayed. Windows faced windows. You could stand in one room, look out, and stare directly into another room across a narrow courtyard. No privacy, no view of the outside world, just glass staring into glass. Some windows were placed at floor level. You would enter a room and nearly trip over a pane of glass set flush with the boards, offering strange views, down into the basement or up into the rafters, depending on where you stood. The ballroom was perhaps the strangest space of all. It was grand, beautiful, parquet floors, stained glass windows worth thousands of dollars, 2 pipe organs, space enough for 100 guests. Sarah loved music and reportedly played alone late at night. But she never held a ball, never hosted a gathering, never invited anyone inside. The room was built, furnished, and then abandoned. Servants said Sarah walked through it sometimes in the dark, trailing her fingers along the walls, but she never played the organs when anyone else was in the house. The stained glass windows featured spider webs, intricate designs shimmering as if caught in morning dew. Spiders appeared throughout the mansion, carved into woodwork, embedded in tile, woven into iron grates. Sarah reportedly believed spiders were good luck, that they trapped evil spirits the way they trapped flies. So she filled the house with their image, a web made of wood and glass and stone. But the web was not just decoration. The house itself had become a web. Hallways tangled, rooms layered over rooms, passages twisted back on themselves until even the men who built them sometimes lost their way. By 1906, the Winchester house had grown to more than 100 rooms. At its tallest point, it rose 7 stories high. Towers loomed above the orchards, visible from the road. It was the largest private residence in California, a mansion rivaling the estates of railroad barons and silver kings. And then, on April 18th at 5:12 in the morning, the earth moved. The shaking began without warning. San Francisco, 60 miles to the north, took the brunt of it. Buildings collapsed, fires ignited, streets split open. More than 3,000 people died within minutes. The Great Earthquake of 1906, magnitude 7.9, became one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. San Jose felt it too. At the Winchester house, the ground rolled like a wave beneath the foundations.
Walls groaned, towers swayed. The web of wood and glass shuddered as the mansion faced a force it could not confuse or outrun. For the first time in decades, the house was no longer growing. It was breaking. Chimneys cracked and toppled, windows shattered outward in bursts of glass. The 7-story tower, the tallest structure on the property, groaned, swayed, and then gave way. Tons of wood and brick collapsed inward, punching through floor after floor, until the debris settled in a massive heap of splintered beams and broken stone. Dust flooded the hallways. The house creaked and moaned as if the entire structure were alive and dying. Sarah Winchester was inside. She had been asleep in an upper-floor bedroom. Exactly which room is unclear. Sarah moved her sleeping quarters often, rarely staying in the same place for more than a few weeks. When the shaking began, she tried to reach the doorway. The standard advice in an earthquake: find a frame, brace yourself. But the door would not open. The house had shifted, the frame warped and jammed. Sarah pushed, pulled, threw her weight against the wood. Nothing. She was trapped, alone in the dark, while the building tore itself apart around her. Servants heard her calling. They grabbed tools, crowbars, anything they could find, and forced their way through hallways clogged with fallen plaster and shattered glass. When they reached the jammed door, it took nearly an hour to pry it open. When Sarah emerged, she was shaken, but physically unharmed.
Emotionally, something had cracked. She walked through the damaged house in silence, past shattered windows, past rooms buried under rubble, past walls split open to expose the raw skeleton of beams and studs beneath the finished surfaces. She saw the collapsed tower, the destruction that had once reached toward the sky, now lying broken at her feet. The workers expected orders. They expected repairs, reconstruction, the tower rebuilt higher, stronger. Instead, Sarah told them to seal it off. The entire front section of the house, 30 rooms, including the tower and the main entrance, was closed. Doors were nailed shut, hallways blocked with furniture and boards, access routes erased. Sarah never entered those rooms again. She never explained her reasoning, but the servants believed they understood. The earthquake, Sarah believed, was a message, a warning from the spirits. She had displeased them somehow, built something wrong, drawn the wrong attention. The collapse of the tower was not random, it was punishment. So she treated the damage like a wound, sealed it, left it frozen in time, and moved construction elsewhere, as if starting over, trying to appease forces that could shake the earth itself. The building continued, but it changed. Before the earthquake, the house had carried a wild, chaotic ambition. Towers reached upward, rooms sprawled outward. There was a sense, however unsettling, that Sarah was building something vast, something monumental, even if no one understood its purpose. After the earthquake, the house turned inward. New rooms were smaller, hallways narrowed, construction focused on horizontal expansion rather than vertical ambition. Wings stretched across the land instead of climbing into the sky, as if Sarah no longer trusted height, as if she wanted to stay closer to the ground. She became more reclusive as well. Before 1906, Sarah occasionally appeared. She inspected finished rooms, left instructions in person, spoke briefly to workers. After the earthquake, she withdrew almost entirely. Days passed without anyone seeing her. Instructions arrived through intermediaries. Cash appeared in envelopes. The foreman managed the crews. The housekeeper managed the staff. And Sarah moved through her own house like a ghost. Neighbors reported seeing lights at strange hours, a single candle flame drifting from window to window, floor to floor, as if someone were searching for something they could not find. The bell in the séance room still rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. Workers still heard footsteps afterward. But now there was something heavier in the air,
a sense that the house had been marked, that the collapse was not merely structural failure, but proof that Sarah Winchester was right to be afraid, and proof that no amount of building would ever be enough. Most people would have quit. The earthquake had nearly killed their employer. The house was a maze that made less sense with each passing year. The work was repetitive, strange, and seemingly endless. Build a wall, tear it down, build it again somewhere else. But the workers stayed, not because they believed in ghosts, not because they understood Sarah's vision. They stayed for something simpler and far more real: loyalty, earned through steady pay and unusual kindness. Sarah Winchester paid better than almost anyone else in the valley. A skilled carpenter could earn about $2 a day working on farms or public buildings. Sarah paid $3 and sometimes more for specialized labor. And she paid every week, in cash, without fail. No delays, no excuses, no quiet wage theft, a common practice in an era when employers often found reasons to dock pay or withhold it entirely. She also fed them. Every day at noon, kitchen staff brought hot meals to the work sites. Not scraps, not leftovers, full plates, roasted meat, vegetables, fresh bread, coffee. In winter there was soup. In summer, cold lemonade and fruit picked from the orchards. For men who often returned home to sparse dinners, this mattered. Some later said the midday meal at the Winchester house was the best food they ate all week. Beyond wages and food, there was something even rarer: security. The 1890s were marked by economic depressions that left families desperate and unemployed. Jobs vanished overnight, entire industries collapsed, but the hammering at the Winchester house never stopped. As long as Sarah Winchester lived, the work continued. So the men stayed, and they kept building.
Banks failed. Businesses shuttered. Construction jobs vanished for months at a time, leaving families desperate and uncertain. Across California, projects were abandoned mid-frame, scaffolding left to rot in the rain. But the Winchester house kept building. Through financial panic, through recession, through hard winters when most employers shut their gates and sent men home empty-handed, Sarah Winchester's house never stopped. Men worked there for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Some stayed so long they brought their sons when the boys were old enough to swing a hammer. Fathers and sons working side by side on staircases that went nowhere and doors that opened into walls. They did not understand the project, but they understood the paycheck. And in an era of brutal economic instability, that was enough. One carpenter, John Hanson, later told a reporter that the Winchester job saved his family. His wife had been ill, medical bills piled up. Other employers would have let him go. A sick family meant missed days, distraction, unreliability. Sarah did not fire him. Instead, she quietly raised his wages and told the foreman to excuse him whenever he needed to leave early. No lectures, no paperwork, just an unspoken understanding that life was hard and people needed space to survive it. Hanson worked on the house for 18 years. Stories like his were common. A laborer whose child needed surgery, Sarah paid for it. A plasterer who broke his arm and couldn't work for 2 months, Sarah kept him on salary anyway. An elderly maintenance man who could no longer climb ladders, Sarah reassigned him lighter duties instead of pushing him out. This was not charity staged for applause. Sarah never advertised her kindness, never called the newspapers, never asked for thanks. She simply took care of the people who took care of her house. The workers noticed, and they protected her in return. When reporters came asking questions, trying to peer through windows, climb fences, catch a glimpse of the so-called mad widow, the workers turned them away. When neighbors whispered about strange lights and midnight bells, the men shrugged and kept their opinions to themselves.
They built her maze. They followed her impossible instructions, and they kept her secrets.
Some of them likely believed she was eccentric, perhaps even unwell, but she was their eccentric employer, and she treated them better than anyone else ever had. So when Sarah asked them to build a staircase that went nowhere, they built it. When she asked them to install a door in the floor, they installed it. And when she asked them to seal off 30 rooms and never speak of what they had seen inside, they sealed the rooms and stayed silent. By 1910, the house had grown to more than 160 rooms, the largest it would ever become, a sprawling, impossible structure that baffled nearly everyone who saw it. But for the men who built it, the Winchester house was not a mystery. It was a job, a good one, and in a world that offered so few of those, that was enough. The newspapers could not resist her. By 1910, Sarah Winchester had become exactly the kind of story that sold papers. A reclusive widow, an immense fortune, a house that made no sense, and best of all, rumors of ghosts, curses, and midnight rituals. The San Francisco Call ran the first major feature, Mystery House of the Santa Clara Valley. The article described a mansion built by a woman who feared the spirits of those killed by her family's rifles. It mentioned sealed rooms, endless construction, workers who spoke in whispers about bells ringing at 2 in the morning. The story spread. Other papers picked it up, then embellished it, then exaggerated it. One claimed Sarah wore a veil at all times and never let servants see her face. Another said she dined at a table set for 13, 12 empty chairs reserved for ghosts. A third reported she had spent more than $5 million on the house, a staggering sum at the time, equivalent to roughly $150 million today, and had no intention of ever finishing. Sarah never responded. She never issued corrections, never gave interviews, never defended herself. Her silence made the stories grow. Each retelling added new layers. The séance room became a chamber of horrors. The staircase to nowhere became proof of insanity. The construction itself became evidence of a woman trapped in delusion, building frantically to outrun death. The public devoured it. This was the Gilded Age sliding into the Progressive Era. America was obsessed with the very rich and the very strange. Industrialists erecting palaces, eccentrics doing inexplicable things with unimaginable wealth. And here was Sarah Winchester, a woman richer than some small nations, spending her fortune on a house that seemed designed to confuse and disturb. She became a caricature, the mad widow, the ghost lady, the woman who talked to the dead. But caricatures flatten truth. They erase complexity. They turn grief into spectacle, and they miss what mattered most. Because behind the rumors, the sealed rooms, and the endless hammering, Sarah Winchester was not a monster or a myth. She was a woman who lost everything, who found structure in building, and who chose to spend her fortune not on power or display, but on keeping people fed, employed, and safe in a world that offered them very little of any of those things. The house may have been strange, but the woman inside it was far more human than the world ever allowed her to be. She did not speak much anymore. Instead, she sat in silence and watched the light move. The bell in the séance room still rang at 2 o'clock in the morning, but not every night. Sometimes it was silent for a week. Then, without warning, it would ring again, 13 sharp chimes cutting through the darkness. When the staff heard it, they knew Sarah Winchester was still searching. For what, no one could say. Answers? Forgiveness? A connection to the husband and infant daughter she had lost decades earlier? Or perhaps something simpler, a moment of quiet in a house built to contain chaos. Her niece, Frances Marriott, visited from time to time. Frances was one of the few family members Sarah still allowed into her life. The visits were brief and formal. Tea in the conservatory, polite conversation, no tours, no explanations. Sarah never showed her the house. She never led Frances through the maze of hallways or the sealed rooms. She never explained the staircases, the doors, or the reasons behind them.
She poured tea, made small talk, and withdrew when her strength faded. Years later, Frances said Sarah seemed smaller with every visit, not just physically, though age and illness had reduced her to a frail, bird-like figure, but smaller in presence, as if the house had grown so large it had absorbed her, as if all that remained was an echo drifting through its halls. In early September of 1922, Sarah moved her bedroom one final time. She chose a small room on the ground floor, plain walls, a single window facing the gardens, no hidden doors, no trap passages, nothing strange, just a quiet space where an old woman could rest. She asked the staff to bring only the essentials, a bed, a chair, a small table, nothing more. After decades filling the house with furniture, objects, and architectural puzzles, her final room was almost empty. On the night of September 4th, she went to bed as usual. The servants checked on her before retiring. She was awake, sitting upright, looking out the window at the moonlit orchard. She died some time before dawn. No bells rang, no earthquake shook the house, no supernatural sign marked the moment. Just an 83-year-old woman, alone in a room she had built, passing quietly in the night. The servants found her in the morning. They notified Frances. The foreman told the workers. By afternoon, the news had spread through San Jose. Sarah Winchester was dead, and for the first time in 38 years, the Winchester house was completely silent. No hammering, no sawing, no footsteps echoing through the halls. The construction was finished, not because the house was complete, it never would be, but because the only person who understood what it was supposed to be, or why it needed to exist at all, was gone.
Frances Marriott stood in the front hallway and stared. She had visited her aunt dozens of times over the years, but Sarah had always controlled those visits. Tea in the conservatory, a walk through the gardens, never a tour, never an explanation, never access to the whole house. Now Sarah was gone. As executor of the estate, Frances had to inventory everything. She brought a team, lawyers, accountants, appraisers, men with clipboards and tape measures, whose job was to catalog the contents and determine the value of the property. They got lost almost immediately. Hallways twisted back on themselves, doors led to unexpected places, staircases appeared where none should exist. One appraiser opened what he thought was a closet and found himself staring down a 40-foot drop into the basement. Another spent 20 minutes trying to find the entrance and somehow ended up on the 3rd floor. Frances hired a local carpenter who had worked on the house to act as a guide. Even he struggled. Rooms he had built 15 years earlier had been sealed or reconfigured. Hallways he remembered clearly were gone. The house had changed so often, so completely, that no one, not even the men who had built it, could navigate it with confidence. The inventory took weeks. 160 rooms, some fully furnished, others completely empty, a few sealed with furniture still inside, untouched since the earthquake of 1906. 40 staircases, 10,000 windows. The team eventually stopped counting precisely and estimated numbers instead. Around 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 17 chimneys, many of them non-functional, stopping short of the roof or venting into enclosed spaces. The scale was overwhelming, but the contents were stranger still. In one room, they found dozens of identical sets of fine china, still boxed, never used. In another, hundreds of bottles of expensive wine coated in dust. Sarah had apparently ordered items in bulk, then forgotten them, or simply never bothered to open them. Closets overflowed with bolts of fabric. Wallpaper rolls were stacked from floor to ceiling. Construction materials filled entire rooms, lumber, nails, glass panes, enough to build another house entirely. It was as if Sarah had been preparing for decades more of construction. But there was almost no trace of her inner life. No diaries, no journals, no explanations. A few letters from family members,
carefully filed. Financial records. Nothing that revealed her thoughts. Nothing that explained why. The séance room offered no answers. The 13 hooks were empty. The cabinet contained robes, just as the servants had said, but nothing occult. No spell books, no artifacts, just cloth and silence. Frances later told reporters she had hoped the house would explain itself, that somewhere inside it would be a document, a note, a plan, a confession that would make sense of the decades of building. She found none. What she found instead was something quieter, harder to name. Not madness, not ghosts, but the physical record of a woman who had poured grief, wealth, and time into walls and corridors, leaving behind a structure that refused to explain itself even after she was gone. And perhaps that, more than any rumor or legend, was the real mystery Sarah Winchester left behind. Receipts told a story the house never had. Stacks of paper showed Sarah Winchester's charitable donations, anonymous contributions to hospitals, orphanages, and disaster relief funds, substantial sums given quietly, without plaques, without public thanks. Records that never made the newspapers, evidence of generosity that asked for nothing in return.
Pay ledgers listed the names of workers who had been on the estate for 10, 20, even 30 years, men who had raised families on Sarah's wages, fathers who had sent children to school, bought land, survived economic collapse because the Winchester house never stopped paying. One entry stood out, a pension paid to a worker who had grown too old to continue. Sarah had kept paying him anyway. There were letters from servants asking for time off to care for sick relatives. Sarah's responses were brief and consistent. Permission granted. Pay continued. Always. As Frances Marriott worked through the records, a different picture began to form. Not a madwoman, not a terrified recluse hunted by ghosts, but a woman who had carried grief and guilt in a way that made sense to her, even if it made sense to no one else. Still, the house itself posed a problem. It was enormous, expensive to maintain, impossible to sell as a private residence. Who would choose to live inside a labyrinth of staircases to nowhere and doors that opened into walls? So the furniture was auctioned off. 5 moving trucks carried away decades of belongings, beds, chairs, cabinets, rugs, lamps, enough to fill a small neighborhood. The sale paid estate taxes and debts, stripping the rooms bare. When it was over, what remained was the house itself. Empty, silent, a shell of wood, glass, and stone with no clear purpose left. Frances did not know what to do with it, so she did what many Americans in the 1920s did with things they did not understand. She turned it into a spectacle. The gates opened to the public in 1923. Less than a year after Sarah Winchester's death, the house became a business.
5 months of preparation followed. Rooms were cleaned, debris cleared, guides hired, brochures printed, and most importantly, one decision was made. What story would be told? Frances could have chosen honesty. She could have presented the house as an architectural curiosity, a monument to grief, a wealthy widow's decades-long project that defied convention, showcased craftsmanship, and provided steady employment during unstable times. But honesty did not sell tickets, so the marketing leaned into fear. The mystery house, the advertisements called it. Come see the mansion built by a woman haunted by the ghosts of those killed by Winchester rifles. Tour guides were instructed to emphasize the supernatural, the curse, the séances, the bell that rang at 2 a.m. Visitors were told Sarah built to confuse evil spirits, that she never slept in the same room twice for fear they would find her, that workers heard voices in empty hallways and saw shadows slide through walls. Some details were true. The bell did ring. The construction never stopped. Sarah did move bedrooms frequently, but the meaning was rewritten. Every odd architectural feature became proof of paranormal belief rather than arthritis, changing plans, or simple eccentricity. Complexity became madness, privacy became fear, and the public loved it. Thousands visited in the first year. Families drove down from San Francisco. Tourists added it to their itineraries. Local children dared each other to take the tour, half hoping to see a ghost, half hoping they would not. The guides developed a script. They led groups through the maze, pointing out the staircase to nowhere, the door that opened into empty air, the windows that faced other windows. They lowered their voices in the séance room, always a whisper, always the suggestion that something unseen might be listening. Some visitors claimed they experienced things. A woman said she felt a hand on her shoulder in an empty hallway. A man reported footsteps following him through the conservatory. Children said they saw faces in the stained glass that vanished when stared at directly. Skeptics offered simpler explanations. Old houses creak, drafts create cold spots, stained glass distorts light, and suggestion is powerful. Tell people a place is haunted, and their minds will search for proof.
But truth mattered less than experience. People wanted to believe. They wanted the Winchester house to be haunted, because if it was haunted, then Sarah's fear had been justified. The curse had been real. The decades of building had a supernatural purpose, not just a tragic one. The house became one of California's most popular roadside attractions. It appeared in travel guides. Postcards showed the exterior shrouded in fog, stamped with the caption, "America's Most Haunted Mansion." Sarah Winchester's memory transformed. In life, she had been private, misunderstood, occasionally pitied. In death, she became a legend, the Mad Widow, the Ghost Lady, the woman who tried to build her way out of a curse and failed. Except, had she? Sarah lived to 83, longer than her husband, longer than many of her contemporaries. She survived tuberculosis outbreaks, the earthquake of 1906, the Spanish flu pandemic. She died peacefully in her sleep, in a bed she had chosen, inside a house she had shaped down to the smallest detail. If the curse claimed she would die when construction stopped, she had already broken it. Building slowed years before her death. It ended entirely in her final weeks. Nothing supernatural happened. No reckoning, no vengeful spirits, just age and time. But that version of the story did not sell tickets. So the guides kept telling the ghost story. They kept framing fear as truth, madness as motive, and grief as weakness. Decades passed. The house changed ownership. The legend grew. And somewhere beneath the stories, beneath the fog machines and whispers, the real Sarah Winchester remained exactly where she had always been, hidden in plain sight, misunderstood, and still quietly refusing to explain herself. Each new owner inherited more than a building. They inherited a story, and they kept telling it. The haunted house narrative endured, passed from decade to decade, polished and embellished but never questioned. The message stayed the same. This place was cursed, and the woman who built it was running from ghosts. By the 1970s and 80s, the Winchester house had become a fixture of paranormal culture. Ghost hunting shows filmed its corridors. Psychics claimed to feel overwhelming spiritual pressure inside its walls. Books about haunted America almost always included a chapter on Sarah Winchester and her endless mansion. The legend grew louder. And the truth, quiet, complex, human, was buried beneath layers of manufactured mystery. But in recent years, something began to change. Historians started looking closer, not at the rumors, but at the records. Not at the ghosts, but at the woman herself, her finances, her correspondence, her treatment of employees, the practical realities behind the so-called supernatural design. A different story emerged, one that did not erase the strangeness, but reframed it. Not a haunted house, a monument to grief, and perhaps, in its own strange way, a monument to hope. The inventory of Sarah Winchester's estate took 6 weeks. Frances Marriott and her team moved room by room, cataloging furniture, china, clothing, and construction materials. But it was the financial records, not the architecture, that told the clearest story. From 1886 until her death, Sarah employed an average of 22 workers continuously. Payroll ledgers showed wages well above the standard rate. A carpenter earning $2 a day elsewhere made $3 at the Winchester estate. Skilled craftsmen earned even more. The books also revealed extensive charitable giving, anonymous donations to San Jose hospitals, money sent to orphanages, relief funds for victims of fires and earthquakes. The amounts were not symbolic, they were substantial, thousands of dollars each year, equivalent to hundreds of thousands today. Medical expenses appeared frequently, not only for Sarah but for her workers. Payments to doctors for injured hands, surgery costs for a laborer's child, notes indicating full wages paid during illness or recovery. One entry stood out: a pension paid monthly to a maintenance worker who had grown too old to continue working. The payments continued for 3 years until his death. Sarah paid him anyway. These were not the records of a madwoman. They were the records of an employer who viewed labor as human, not disposable. When historians looked back at the house itself with this lens, many mysteries softened into explanations. The shallow staircases were not supernatural. They accommodated severe arthritis. Medical records confirmed Sarah suffered from chronic joint pain that worsened over time. Standard stairs would have been painful, eventually impossible. The multiple bedrooms made sense for someone managing constant discomfort. Moving allowed her to avoid drafts, adjust elevation, and stay closer to ground floor facilities as climbing became harder.
Doors that opened to nowhere were often obsolete openings. Construction plans changed, wings were added, old passageways became unnecessary but were left intact rather than plastered over in a house under near constant renovation. That was not madness, it was practicality. Windows facing windows brought light into interior corridors that otherwise would have been dark. The house sprawled so widely that many hallways had no exterior walls. Interior windows solved that problem. Even the séance room offered rational explanations. Multiple exits provided escape routes in case of fire, a serious concern in an era of gaslighting and dry wood construction. The 13 hooks may have held keys, tools, or household items. The bell system allowed Sarah to communicate with servants without shouting or walking long distances. None of this means Sarah was not spiritual. Records show she attended spiritualist churches. Letters reference belief in an afterlife. Seances likely occurred, but spiritualism in the late 19th century was not fringe, it was mainstream. Millions of Americans attended seances. Scientists studied mediums. Presidents consulted spiritualists. Sarah's beliefs placed her firmly within her era, not outside of it. The construction itself served several purposes at once. It gave Sarah a project, something to plan, to oversee, to control. Widows of her class were often expected to fade quietly into domestic obscurity. Instead, she ran a large-scale construction operation for nearly 4 decades. And it provided steady work during unstable times. The 1890s were marked by economic panics. Construction jobs vanished. Families went hungry. But the Winchester house never stopped building. It offered consistent wages when consistency was rare. What Sarah was building was not just a house. She was building stability. She was building purpose. She was building a structure large enough to contain grief and sturdy enough to support the lives of others. The ghosts made for a better story, but the truth was more remarkable.
Sarah Winchester was not running from the dead. She was building something for the living. Whatever her motivations, grief, guilt, spirituality, or simple eccentricity, the result endures. The Winchester House has stood for more than a century, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors and employing generations of guides, caretakers, and tour staff.
The wealth that built it came from rifles and death, a fact that never changed. But Sarah's use of that fortune transformed inherited wealth into wages, craft, and charity. She turned grief into labor, loss into architecture, and guilt into rooms that continue to confound and fascinate. Whether this counts as redemption is for each observer to decide. What is indisputable, a widow, alone and grieving, spent 38 years building a house that made sense to her, even when it made no sense to anyone else. She paid her workers fairly, gave generously to strangers, and left behind a creation that has outlasted her by more than a century. The house survives today not because of curses, ghosts, or superstition, but because of the deliberate choices of one woman, choices that turned sorrow into lumber, glass, and more than 60 rooms of architectural marvel and mystery. By all practical measures, the Winchester house should have been demolished decades ago. It was too vast to maintain, too strange to sell, and too costly to heat, repair, or adapt for modern living. Logic dictated subdivision, demolition, and resale. Yet the house endured. Perhaps it was its sheer audacity. One woman, without a formal blueprint, had created a structure rivaling the mansions of industrial titans. Or perhaps it was the legend, the curse, the ghosts, the never-ending construction that preserved it. By the 1920s, the narrative itself had value, not scholarly, but cultural and commercial. Over time, the house evolved. In the 1960s, new ownership modernized the tours, installed electric lighting, and stabilized the structure. Earthquake damage from 1906 was finally repaired. Rooms that had been sealed for decades were reopened, revealing spaces frozen in time. The story shifted slightly. Less mad widow, more architectural curiosity. Guides emphasized Sarah's intelligence, her business acumen, and her care for employees alongside the ghost stories. By the 1980s and 90s, the mansion drew paranormal investigators. EMF detectors, infrared cameras, and audio recorders searched for proof of spectral presence. Nights were spent documenting cold spots, unexplained noises, and fleeting shadows. Some declared the house genuinely haunted. Others offered rational explanations: wood expanding and contracting, air currents creating sudden chills, the mind's readiness to see what it expects. Historians noted grief etched in design. Architects saw adaptation for physical pain. Believers, skeptics, and professionals all found evidence, each in their own way correct. In 2016, the story reached a global audience, with Winchester, starring Helen Mirren. The film transformed Sarah's quiet, decades-long life into a supernatural thriller, a tortured medium haunted by spirits racing against malevolent forces. It took liberties, inventing characters and events, but it reignited fascination. Millions discovered the Winchester name, and the mansion's ticket sales surged. The house had become something Sarah never intended, a character itself, living as much in imagination as in timber and stone. Today, more than a century after Sarah's death, the Winchester Mystery House remains one of California's most visited attractions. Tourists walk its labyrinthine hallways, climb staircases that lead nowhere, step through doors opening onto walls, and stand in the séance room, contemplating the life and mind behind it. Tours cater to every interest. Standard tours focus on architecture and ghost stories. Specialty tours explore basements, attics, and hidden spaces, offering glimpses of areas normally closed to the public. The house continues to enthrall, perplex, and inspire. Visitors marvel at its eccentric design and haunting history, but beneath the legend lies a simpler truth. Sarah Winchester built a life-size monument to grief, resilience, and human ingenuity. A house born of sorrow, yet sustained by vision and care. A house that refuses to die. Behind-the-scenes tours reveal the hidden skeleton of the Winchester Mystery House, the structural engineering, the restoration, the endless effort required to keep a 140-year-old mansion standing. Flashlight tours at night offer a different experience entirely. Walkways shrouded in darkness, narrow beams of light cutting across creaking floors, shadows stretching along hallways. Every groan, every draft, every sudden shift of air feels magnified. In that setting, it is easy to believe in ghosts.
Historical tours tell a different story. They focus on Sarah Winchester's life, the men who labored under her direction, and the turbulent world she inhabited. Visitors learn of her grief, her spiritualism, and the complicated dance between wealth, responsibility, and guilt. The gift shop reflects the duality of legend and reality. Victorian architecture books sit alongside ghost hunting kits. Replicas of Winchester rifles share space with Sarah Winchester dolls. Fact and fiction coexist in a house that has never fit neatly into a category. Even today, the mansion holds secrets. In 2016, a room sealed since Sarah's time was discovered, hidden behind a wall for nearly a century. Inside, untouched Victorian wallpaper, a sink, a fireplace, all perfectly preserved. It was a stark reminder that the house still defies complete understanding. Even workers who walk its corridors daily admit the mansion is only partially mapped. More hidden rooms, more sealed passages, more decisions Sarah made remain undiscovered. The Winchester house refuses to be fully known. It refuses to be simple. It refuses to die, just like the woman who built it.
The Winchester house appears in more than 50 books about haunted America. Paranormal investigators have filmed dozens of television episodes within its walls. Podcasts dissect the legend. YouTubers trace the maze-like floor plan and hunt for cold spots with infrared cameras. Over generations, the mansion has become a cultural fixture, an endlessly referenced, analyzed, and reinterpreted icon. How the house is interpreted has evolved. In the 20s and 30s, newspapers framed Sarah as a madwoman, the widow driven to obsession by grief and guilt. She embodied the era's anxieties about wealthy, unconventional women. If unsupervised by male relatives, they were assumed unstable. By the 1960s and 70s, the narrative softened. Sarah became a tragic figure. Losses weighed upon her, but the focus was on sorrow, not pure insanity. The dead child, the deceased husband, the burden of inherited fortune lent sympathy to her eccentricities.
The 1980s brought the paranormal boom. Sarah became a medium in popular imagination, the house evidence of spirits at work. Staircases to nowhere, doors opening to drops, and labyrinthine corridors were interpreted as proof that the supernatural had been literally built into the walls. In recent decades, historians and feminist scholars have re-examined her life. The picture that emerges is of a capable woman, managing vast finances, supervising complex construction, and running a business for nearly 40 years. Payroll records, contracts, and correspondence reveal organization and consistency, not chaos. While grief and spiritualism were part of her life, Sarah's choices were deliberate. The house was a decades-long project executed with sustained management, not the random outpouring of a deranged mind. Even the legendary curse story is under scrutiny. No contemporary source quotes Sarah herself claiming a curse. Tales of the Boston medium appear only after her death, likely amplified to make early tours more dramatic. The indisputable facts remain. Sarah inherited roughly $20 million in 1881, $500 million in today's currency. She relocated to California and built almost continuously for 38 years. She employed workers above market wages, donated generously to charity, and lived to 83, dying peacefully in her sleep. The mansion that remains, 160 rooms, roughly 40 staircases, architectural oddities that still defy simple explanation.
The séance room, the ongoing construction, the labyrinthine hallways, all real. What those facts mean is another matter. Was she mad, spiritual, grieving, eccentric, or some combination of all four? Each visitor decides. Walking the hallways, standing in a room with a staircase that leads nowhere, observing doors that open onto walls, people interpret the house through their own lens. Some see signs of mental illness, others perceive a deeply personal way of managing grief. Believers see proof of the paranormal. Skeptics cite thermal expansion, drafts, and psychology. The Winchester mansion is a mirror. It reflects the observer as much as it preserves the story of the woman who built it.
People mostly find their own beliefs reflected back at them within the Winchester Mystery House. That ambiguity is its defining trait. The mansion resists a single explanation, pushes back against neat labels, and even after more than 140 years, remains genuinely mysterious in a world obsessed with certainty. Sarah never wrote an autobiography. She never granted long interviews to explain her decisions. No manifesto or letter outlined her intentions. The house itself is the only statement she left behind, and architecture, unlike prose, carries no footnotes. It can be read in endless ways, each interpretation as valid as the next. Today, the Winchester House stands in the heart of San Jose. Once surrounded by orchards and open land, it is now hemmed in by suburbs, office parks, and tech campuses. The isolation is gone, the silence is gone, but the house endures, sprawling, crooked, impossible to tame, and still resisting any singular story. Hundreds of thousands of visitors move through its halls each year. They climb staircases that lead nowhere, stand in the séance room, and peer through windows that look not out at the world, but directly into other windows. Each leaves with a version of Sarah Winchester, a theory of her purpose, and a sense of why she never stopped building. Step through the Winchester House today, and the experience is controlled. Tour groups follow marked paths, velvet ropes cordon off fragile areas, and signs point out architectural oddities. The goal is to keep visitors safe and the mansion standing. But imagine walking through in 1920, when Sarah still inhabited the house and construction never paused. You would enter through whichever door she had designated that month as the front entrance. Servants would lead you down hallways that twisted unexpectedly, past open doorways where carpenters hammered and sawed. The air would be thick with the scent of fresh sawdust, oil, wet plaster, and drying varnish. Dust hung in the sunlight that spilled through unfinished windows, catching in floating motes. Voices and hammer blows echoed, bouncing off walls under construction. You would pass the workers without acknowledgement. They knew to keep their eyes down, their lips shut, their hands busy. Plans changed daily. Rooms were started, abandoned, restarted. One corridor could vanish into a sealed wall the next week. You would wait in the conservatory or sitting room among plants and heavy furniture. Sometimes Sarah appeared, a small black-clad figure, polite but distant, her voice soft and precise, leaving interactions as quickly as fatigue allowed. Other times she did not. The servant returned with an apology. Mrs. Winchester was indisposed. Please leave your card. If you met her, the conversation was brief, words chosen carefully. Meetings ended as soon as she grew tired, which was often. She did not host gatherings or salons. She merely allowed interruptions. You would depart through a different door than the one you entered. A hallway might appear that you had never seen. A staircase, a landing, or a room that seemed familiar would feel entirely new. Was this intentional, a way to confuse spirits, as the stories claimed, or simply a byproduct of a house constantly in motion? No one knew. That version of the house is gone. Sarah is gone. The constant rhythm of construction is gone. What remains is the shell, architecture without its architect.
Tour guides fill the gap, explaining features like the 7-step staircase ending at a ceiling, built for spirits, or abandoned plans, or a design test left incomplete. A door opening onto a 15-foot drop could be a trap for ghosts, an unfinished balcony, or a cost-saving mistake. The mansion itself offers no confirmation.
This is the secret of the Winchester house's endurance. It is not the ghost stories, though those sell tickets. Not merely the oddities, though many other houses have quirks. It is the uncertainty, the feeling that Sarah knew something we do not. That every hallway, every addition, every staircase contained purpose, even if only she understood it, and she never wrote it down. The house became a monument to unanswered questions, to grief that could not be neatly spoken, to decisions that made sense to one person while baffling the rest of the world. Visitors wander, trying to decode 38 years of constant building. They will not succeed. Sarah did not construct the house to be solved. She built because building was what she needed to survive, to continue, to keep moving. The reason why remains hers alone. The lights go out around midnight. The last tour groups filter out. Staff lock the doors, set alarms, and drive away. The mansion sits alone, outlined in the faint orange glow of streetlights, with the distant hum of highways threading through the night. Inside, the walls, windows, and staircases endure, silent witnesses to the life of the woman who spent decades shaping them. The house is still sprawling, still labyrinthine, still full of choices that no visitor, no historian, no ghost hunter can fully understand. Sarah Winchester is gone, but her creation lives on, defiant, mysterious, and impossibly alive in wood, glass, and stone. It continues to confound, to amaze, to invite interpretation. It will likely outlast everyone hearing this story, still generating theories, still refusing simplicity. The Winchester Mystery House is a mirror of its creator, complex, resilient, and endlessly enigmatic. The echoes of a life spent building, grieving, and persevering remain embedded in every beam, every corridor, every locked room.
It is ultimately a legacy in motion, a house that refuses to die, just like the woman who made it. This is when the Winchester house feels closest to what it was in Sarah's time. Empty hallways stretch ahead, silence broken only by the creak of old wood and the subtle shifting of its foundations. No tour guides, no laughter, no audio recordings, just the sounds the house makes as temperature drops, as timber contracts and glass expands. Modern technology watches over it. Security cameras scan the rooms, motion sensors guard the corridors. Yet even now the mansion behaves unpredictably. Sensors trigger with no clear cause. Cameras capture drifting shadows that could be dust or drafts or something else entirely. The staff has stories. Footsteps echoing across a locked second floor. A maintenance worker finding a window ajar though it had been latched the night before. Each incident is easy to attribute to age, warped wood, or a tired mind, but they accumulate, layering the house with the same eerie whispers recorded by workers in the 1890s. Footsteps in empty halls, doors that refuse to stay closed, the sensation of movement just beyond sight, always ahead, always unseen. Whether the Winchester house is truly haunted remains unresolved. The evidence is, and has always been, ambiguous. It likely always will be. Yet the question itself reveals something deeper. Why do people want it to be haunted? If the house is haunted, Sarah's fear had a target. The curse was real, and she spent 38 years battling it, armed with hammers, saws, and her own inexhaustible will. If the house is merely wood and glass, the physics of an aging structure, then her decades of building were a pursuit of something that existed only in her mind. That version is harder to accept. The haunting, imagined or not, gives the story shape, transforming grief into ghost story, and ghost stories, after all, are easier to tell.
But in the dead of night, standing alone in the mansion, the difference blurs. Sarah Winchester walked these same halls for decades, alone, at night, making choices no one else could understand. She turned sketches and instructions into a structure that has outlasted her, the workers who built it, and the generations who followed. The house remains strange, inexplicable in places, and still draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. They come seeking ghosts, architecture, history, or simply the legend of the house with stairs to nowhere. And almost every visitor leaves with the same questions. What was Sarah building? What did she believe? What drove her for 38 unbroken years? The house offers no answers. It just stands, doors leading nowhere, staircases into ceilings, windows staring into other windows, a labyrinth of wood and glass resisting understanding. Sarah Winchester has been dead for more than a century, yet the mansion she left continues to ask questions, confound visitors, and prove that some stories refuse neat conclusions. This is the dark, enduring story of America's most infamous mansion.
The Winchester Mystery House is a California historical landmark, designation number 868, assigned in 1974. The plaque reads, "Built by Sarah L. Winchester, heiress to the Winchester rifle fortune, from 1884 to 1922. Folklore claims construction continued without interruption for 38 years to appease spirits. Even the official marker hedges. The folklore is noted, not verified. The doubt is embedded in the record. The house is under constant restoration. Rotten boards replaced, foundations reinforced, seismic retrofitting added to meet modern earthquake codes. Paint is analyzed and matched to original colors. Preservation work never truly ends. It only replaces expansion with care. Around 50 staff maintain the property full-time: tour guides, maintenance crews, historians, gift shop employees, security. More than a century after Sarah's death, the mansion still provides paychecks. Annual revenue reportedly exceeds $10 million, mostly from admissions, with additional income from events, private tours, corporate gatherings, and paranormal investigation nights. The curse, whether fact or invention, still supports the house. Schools bring students on field trips. Architecture programs dissect its construction. Psychology classes study Sarah's life and the myths surrounding it. The lessons drawn depend entirely on the perspective of the observer. Sarah is buried in New Haven, Connecticut, beside her husband William and daughter Annie. 3 Winchesterers together again, 3,000 miles from the mansion she shaped over decades. Her gravestone is simple: names and dates, no mention of the house, no reference to rifles. The stone tells part of the story, but the rest lives in the mansion itself. 38 years of construction, 160 rooms, a tangle of unanswered questions. The Winchester Mystery House stands as Sarah Winchester's true monument, strange, sprawling, defiant, and resistant to tidy explanations. Just as she left it, just as she built it, enigmatic, uncompromising, and unforgettable.